The SAT and IELTS are necessary, okay, as long as you get to certain level.
Right, yeah.
Then their personal essay and the recommendations actually signify who you are.
I would say test scores are necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
Once your score gets high enough, it doesn't really matter. The admission committee will focus on the essay and your recommendation letters. I think the best way is to just learn naturally by exposing yourself to English content.
You need to try to have probably like the topic sentence within like 30 seconds. You want to describe yourself.
Right.
And second of all, it has to be authentic, but not too tedious, not too boring, right? And try to expand it when you have the storyline, okay? And you try to apply it in real situations. How could you go there, like from the 60 ranking to the first ranking in computer science? How could you make it?
So it comes back to the appreciating teacher point. For the big tech, they have very strong and accurate machine learning models because they invest a lot into that. Even like the current large language model, like ChatGPT, they are also predictive models where they just trying to predict like what is the most likely word that comes next after the current text.
Hi, my beloved audience. Today I have a very special guest here who works for Amazon and graduated with a PhD degree from the top one university in the world in terms of computer science. Hi, Huy. Can you briefly introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, Trường, and hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I'm currently a machine learning scientist at Amazon. I previously got a PhD in human-computer interaction from Carnegie Mellon, and also a bachelor in computer science. This year actually marks the 10th year that I have been in the US. So I'm very excited to be back here and share my experience with you. So yeah, awesome.
Okay, so for a brief highlight, he was my friend in Luyện High School for the Gifted. And our major was mathematics, and then he has been in the US for 10 years. So you graduated from high school, and
right.
Which is the first school that you enter when you went to the US?
Yeah, so my undergrad school was called Lafayette College. It's a liberal arts college in Pennsylvania.
So as I did the research, it's ranked like 60 in the overall ranking, which was a very high school. Yeah. So how could you choose it? How could you find it in the first place?
Yeah, so back when I did the school search, there were actually not that many resources because this was like 10 or 11 years ago. And so I mostly just looked at online rankings. But the factors that I consider when choosing the school was like the location, the job prospect, and probably most importantly, the financial aid package. Because my family could not afford to pay full tuition. So because of that, I kind of lean towards liberal arts college, which are generally more generous in their scholarship.
Wow.
And Lafayette was kind of an interesting match between having good scholarship and also a strong engineering program. So that's why I went with that school.
Yeah, so it's the balance between financial matters and the quality, because you don't want to compromise any of it.
Yeah.
So out of curiosity, how many schools did you actually apply for?
So I had like, I think 15 schools in my list.
Yeah.
Although I only applied to one school, which is Lafayette. This is because the admission process is a bit interesting because there are basically two stages. There's the early decision, which means you can only apply to one school. But if you are accepted, then you have to enroll there. So it's like a commitment. And then the second stage is the regular decision, where you can apply to as many schools as you want. So I picked Lafayette as my early decision option. And then I got admitted, so then I didn't have to apply.
I haven't known it because I thought like there would be a lot of schools and people just chose randomly, and then they could accept or reject it. So it's it like a mess, but actually there's certain commitment, right?
Right.
In terms of the requirements, what were the key requirements in terms of the English certificates as well as other like extracurricular activities that you think that were most important to apply to your school?
So I would say there are four main components. There's your high school transcript. There's the standardized test scores, which are like TOEFL or IELTS, and then SAT or ACT. And then there's your personal essay.
Yeah.
And then the recommendation letter. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of the first one, the high school, okay, rip up the score. Okay, was that important, and how important was it?
I would say it's actually not the most important.
Yeah.
And that applies to the standardized test scores as well. I think we Vietnamese students kind of have the misconception that like you have to get the maximum score possible.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I would say test scores are necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
In the sense that like once your score gets high enough, it doesn't really matter past that point. And then the admission committee will focus on the other parts, which are like your essay, your extracurricular, and your recommendation letters, because those are the real factors that can distinguish between you and another student.
Okay, so for my understanding, the SAT and IELTS are necessary, okay, as long as you get to certain level.
Right, yeah.
Then their personal essay and the recommendations actually signify who you are real, or who you are.
Yeah.
But how high the score should be? Right now, SAT is like based on the range of 1,600. So, what score do you think is important for IELTS and SAT, just to get the bare minimum, so they can consider other factors?
I think for the most accurate data, you can just look up on like online ranking websites, because usually they don't have information about like what is the average score of students who got admitted to this school. So you can use that as your benchmark. I don't know what the new SAT looks like, but I know for TOEFL, I think like above 110 is like is enough, right?
Is
So
enough. Okay, so any extra does not matter a lot, right? Okay, that's great. But many students in Vietnam still have like problems in terms of studying IELTS and SAT. Do you actually have any tips or strategies for them to learn effectively, not very fast, but effectively, from your personal experience?
Yeah, I think the best way is to just learn naturally by exposing yourself to English content, whether it's like movies or YouTube, or even like reading comics and novels. For me, I was a big manga reader, and
manga reader.
a lot of mangas were not translated to Vietnamese at the time, so I kind of forced myself to learn English, just so I can read manga. And in that aspect, I think young people these days are already, they have a lot more resources than I ever did back when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Like if you just watch one TikTok a day, that's already more English than I ever got. So I think that's a good thing, and you can just keep going with that.
Yeah. First of all, I do agree that doing tests are important. Okay, learning, reading textbooks, but immersing ourselves into the real English environment, whether it is like reading comics books or TikTok or YouTube, would be like a very organic and natural way to learn. Okay.
Yeah.
So
just to add, I think the nice thing about internet access nowadays is that you can actually practice speaking as well, and not just reading or listening. So for example, if you play games, usually you can have like a Discord group of people from different countries, and then you can speak English with them. So that's a really cool thing that we did not have back in nowadays.
So for the two last part, okay, personal essay and recommendations, how could you make it very attractive and appealing to the recruiters?
Yeah, so I can speak a bit about my thought process when I wrote my essay. I think the best way is so you want to pick something that really highlights who you are, and a good starting point is to think about it from an elevator pitch. So if you only have 30 seconds to introduce yourself, what would you bring up? And then you try to expand that point into a whole essay. For me, so the problem I had back in the days is I studied a lot of math, but then I did not do much else. And so I knew that my essay would have to be about math in some ways, but I did not want to make it too boring. But it just so happened that at the time, my family was renovating our house. So we destroyed the old one and then we built a new one. And so I wrote about like how I applied my math skills to help with some of the logistics and planning. And I think it worked well enough.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So for my understanding, first you need to try to have like probably like the topic sentence within like 30 seconds. You want to describe yourself.
Right.
And second of all, it has to be authentic, but not too tedious, not too boring, right? And try to expand it when you have the storyline, okay? And you try to apply it in real situation to describe who you really are. Okay, that's great. So now when okay, so what's your first feeling when you got accepted in the undergraduate program?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of like relief and excitement. Relief because I don't have to write essay for other schools. That's always a real painful thing. And then it's excitement because like I'm coming to the US, right? Obviously, I heard a lot about the US from movies and textbooks, and I'm actually coming there.
Okay. Also, one thing I noticed about this guy when we were in high school, he had a really focus on his study, whether it was our IELTS, TOEFL, or SAT, and also he got the third prize of the national prizes. Okay, how could you maintain and sustain your focus on studying for such extended periods of time?
I think there was actually some luck involved because like back in my days, when you are involved with like math Olympiad and competition, you don't have to go to regular class. So for me, it's just like either math and English and nothing else.
But there were distractors as well, right?
Yeah.
How could you like just study a lot instead of like being involved with a lot of parties or something like that?
Yeah, I think part of it comes to discipline and part of it comes to family influence. My mom was actually very strict about me being a good son.
Wow.
Let's put it that way. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. So to summarize, like when we was in Learn from High School for the Gifted, those who got like great score in terms of math, for example, and they study further, they didn't need to like attend all the classes. That was a competitive edge. However, he has like both discipline and their family influence to make him a very strict person to focus on his study. Okay. So we're moving to the US right now. Okay, when you enter the US, what were the most interesting challenges that you first faced?
Yeah, I think the biggest surprise for me in the US is the studying pressure is actually not that high in the sense that if you do well in Vietnam, you probably do well in the US just because there's less workload there. On the other hand, there are like pressures from the other aspects that you have to consider. For example, there's the social pressure. And job application is another big source of stress because in the US, like people actually do internship very early, like as soon as the summer after the first year, because you really need a solid internship experience to get a good job. So if you want an internship next summer, you have to apply from August this year, right? So as soon as you arrive in the US, the job search is already beginning.
Wow.
And it's always on your mind constantly. So that's
yeah. So it seemed like studying in the US is not that stressful, but applying for jobs, dealing with social issues, like for example, his roommates or some conflicts. Okay, that look small, but actually very confusing.
And those are very new issues, like especially to high school students who just come to the US for the first time. So yeah.
Oh yeah. So I was about to ask you like about very high GPA. It's like 3.93 in your undergraduate program. How could you make it?
I would say my GPA is not that high. I have no Vietnamese students who have like 3.97 or even 4.0, which is the highest GPA possible. Now the question is, why did I not have 4.0 GPA? And the answer is, at least in my field of computer science, as I got closer to graduation, I realized that GPAs are not really that important for either job search or graduate school application. They are treated kind of similar to SAT and TOEFL in the sense that like once it's high enough, it doesn't matter anymore.
All right. So how high should it be?
I think it's above 3.8 is good enough for CS, but this is field dependent. So like if you want to study MBA, for example, then you really need a 4.0. But CS is people prioritize like experience and external projects more than GPA.
So your major is Bachelor of Computer Science, right? How could you like validate that major whether it aligns with your personal goal or your long-term goal or not? How could you know that the one?
I would say long-term goal is a bit of a stretch because like if you're just a first-year college student, you can't really know what your long-term goal is. But you can tell whether a major is suitable for you. And the good question is, are you willing to like do more projects related to this major outside of class or not? If you're still excited about that, then it's probably a good match. But if you're thinking like, okay, like class is already hard enough, I don't care anymore, then it's probably not your major. I mean, for CS, like it's always useful to have programming skills, but there's a difference between like being a full-time programmer and doing something else that you really like, but having the opportunity to apply programming skills to that field instead.
Okay, so some people they might be more like inclined to business majors, but they might think like, okay, being like a business man or woman in the US will not rent them the green card or something like that in the long term. What do you think? So some might choose computer science or STEM related majors instead.
I would say I think it's more like the opposite because right now the tech market in the US is really bad. So there's a lot of hiring freeze and layoff. And new graduates especially have a hard time to find a job. So if the goal is to study CS to get a green card, then CS is actually not the best major. Whereas something more traditional like chemical engineer or civil engineer, you get a lot more stable career. Of course you get paid less, but the career is stable and then you can work your way toward green card.
Interesting. The next question is, do you think that Vietnamese people have any specific strengths compared to other groups?
So I would say there is no single aspect which Vietnamese are really the best at. Usually we are known for being hardworking, but that applies to other Asian students as well, especially those from China and India. However, I think we are strong in three aspects. And when we combine them, that can actually create a unique opportunity. So the first aspect is hardworking, as I mentioned. The second aspect is adaptability, because our country is always growing, and so Vietnamese students tend to get exposure to many different cultures, and that makes them adapt more easily. This is in contrast to Chinese students, for example, because what I have seen is that Chinese students, they're very united and they're very patriotic, but that also means they tend to stick together. So they have their own social circle and they don't interact with people outside of that. And sometimes that makes it difficult for them to adapt.
Do you find any difficulty like interacting with new friends when you came to the US, like friends from other countries, for example?
I would say you need different strategies for people from different countries. I think usually white Americans are very sociable. So if you have something that interests them, then they'll be willing to open up to you. Chinese students are a bit trickier. Usually you either cook for them, so you invite them to have some food, or you play games with them. Like if you're good at Dota or League.
So we need to know the common traits of them. So you mentioned three things. The first thing is being a hardworking student. Second is having some flexibility.
Right.
And the third thing is
the third thing is I would say our culture of respecting and appreciating the teacher. That's very different from the US because there I think students kind of view teacher in a more transactional manner. So like I pay you tuition, you teach me, and after the class is done, then we just go on our ways.
Yeah.
Whereas Vietnamese appreciate.
I've read some book like being prayerful would give you some power actually. Okay, when you appreciate those who have taught you,
Right.
and then they would come back in an unexpected way. And Vietnamese students actually love their teachers and highly appreciate their efforts. I think
Right.
that's our strength, right?
Yeah, so like an example is, let's say you take a class with a professor and then you like their research, so you want to apply to be an assistant in their lab. So instead of just sending an email and ask about like, can I work in your lab? You could start by sending them a thank you email first, just saying like how you appreciate their teaching. And then that will trigger like a positive response from them. And then you can follow up by asking about the assistant opportunity.
So that's a great tip, right? First you appreciate them, you can write them a thank you letter, but I think in a very organic, natural, and we really feel it way. And then if you ask for any assistant, they are especially positively willing to help us. Right? So let's come to the third part, also the last part. When you graduated from undergraduate program, again, there are usually two major career paths, like working directly to the corporates right away, and second to continue studying. Okay, why you choose the latter part instead? The first part, maybe the income are higher if you work immediately.
Yeah, I think it is a problem that I gave a lot of thought into. One thing I want to just introduce first is that in the US, PhD is always free. You don't have to pay tuition, and you also get a small amount of salary every month, like $2,000 or $3,000. So you're treated like a regular employee.
That's small. Yeah, 2,000 to 3,000.
A student. And so what that means is, if you're really passionate about research and you want to do a PhD, money is not a concern because again, you don't have to pay anything. But obviously, there's still the opportunity cost because instead of making $3,000 a month as a student, you could be making $10,000 a month if you want to work right away. So then it comes down to, I guess, like what kind of job do you want to do? So for my case, when I was about to graduate from undergrad, I decided that if I were to go to work, with my skill set, I would only be an engineer. And there's nothing wrong with engineers. It's just that if I also study graduate school, then I'll have more opportunities. For example, as a applied scientist or research scientist. And I can still be an engineer if I want to. So it just opened up more options. And then, and I think I also happen to have a connection with a professor from Carnegie Mellon, which is a really good school in CS. So
it's a top one school, right? Okay, how could you go there, like from the 60 ranking to the first ranking in computer science? Their school name is Carnegie Mellon University. It's the top one, right? How could you make it?
So it comes back to the appreciating teacher point that I talked about earlier. So my advisor just happened to have a former student that is already doing a PhD at Carnegie Mellon. And then because I work with him closely and he likes me, so he introduced me to that former student. And then that student introduced me to a professor. So that's how I established the connection. And I do think that without a connection, there's no way I would have been admitted to Carnegie. So it's really, networking is like a top one priority.
So some people think like networking is just important in Vietnam. Actually, it's important even in the US, right? Especially genuine networking that we highly appreciate your teachers. Oh, that's
and I guess another point I can make about PhD is that you can actually apply for green card while you're a PhD student. So there's a special category where if you demonstrate that your research benefits the US, you can sponsor your own green card, so you don't need anyone else or any employer.
So when you're doing the PhD, you can apply for the green card, which is the top one concern of, like, maybe top 10 concerns of people in the US, students who study abroad. Okay, that's very realistic, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what are the challenges when you work for, first of all, you do work for like Microsoft and Amazon as an intern first,
right?
Okay, what were the challenges back then?
Yes, challenge, I would say, I think there's nothing that really stands out, but that's just a general feeling of like, okay, you're working at a really cool company, but in reality, you're just a bottom layer, and they can just lay you up anytime. So that's kind of and it did happen, like a lot of layoff happened in the COVID area. So that's just something that you have to always be mindful of.
Yeah.
And so in practice, that means like, you should not stay committed to one employer. So always be on the job market and look out for other opportunities. Okay.
So can you tell me a little bit more about your job? What is like computer interaction, human interaction?
So I guess so human computer interaction is kind of like a subfield in computer science, and it focuses on basically how humans interact with computer.
Yeah.
But so it's very different from the more traditional computer science areas where there's almost no human factor. For example, if you work in networking or database or operating system, you don't really care about humans. But human-computer interaction it consists of fields like virtual reality or education technology, right, where the technology interact directly with a human. And so like you have to consider the human factor because that shapes how you develop the technology. So the subfield that I was actually interested in is education technology. Like how do we apply CS and AI to build smarter educational platforms? Yeah. And that just happened to be a part of SCI, which is why.
Probably my English center would really need it. With your customer, right? To the best of my knowledge, like machine learning is about like the machine, they try to collect the information as fast as they can, and then they analyze those data and they go back with solutions. Is this true for machine learning that you are doing?
I think it's mostly about prediction. So you try to make prediction of the future based on the past data. For example, it's like predicting the stock market price or
how accurate they are from your personal experience?
I would say for the big tech, they have very strong and accurate machine learning models because they invest a lot into that. And so even like the current large language model, like ChatGPT, they are also predictive model where they just try to predict like what is the most likely word that comes next after the current text. And that's how they're able to generate very fancy responses.
Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of Amazon, and they have like the culture of like trial and error. Like they have done a lot of experience. I've seen like the ref, like they have been doing more in terms of experience, and they're not scared of being like of having failure. Is this true? Is this the culture of Amazon, you think?
Yeah, I would say a big part of why the big tech companies are leading is because they can afford to invest a lot in research and development, even if those projects may turn out to be failure in the end. One experience I can say is when I was an intern at Microsoft. So I was running a study where we had like 1,000 participants. And then after the study, I had to pay $10 to each of the participants to thank them for coming to the study. Right? So that's like $10,000. And then after the study, we analyzed the data and we saw some interesting results that we want to do more testing on. But then we don't have participants anymore because the study was over. So then I asked my supervisor, like, okay, what should we do? And he said, oh, that's not a problem. I'll give you another $10,000. Just get more people. And so that was really shocking to me because like he just decided to spend $10,000 without a second thought like that.
Yeah.
Because Microsoft is rich enough to do that. Whereas if I were to do that project in my school, there's no way my advisor would give me that much money.
Actually, I guess it's the mindset of the business owner and the normal staff. Actually, I think like people are very strict, and that's very good in terms of saving money. But the people who do the investment, they just don't really care as long
Correct.
as they can see the long-term future.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Hui, so much for spending our time being with us today. And I'm very honored to be part of the interview today. Okay. Wish you the best, and you can continue contribute to their human prosperity. Okay. Thank you, Hui.
Thank you.